Chapter 2 Gabriel Duor. Gabe studied a nondescript house from across a residential street. He stood in an older neighborhood, the cookie-cutter houses unique only in their state of dilapidation, the same color stucco chipped away in different places, the same shaped arches cracked and fading in different spots. The house Gabe singled out had no numbers on the front, no mailbox, no identifying features, no cars in the driveway, no toys littering the front yard, no arrays of odds and ends sticking out from under the porch or piled against the fence. Every other house had at least one of these things. If no one was here, it meant he was too late. Abigail had been worried. She'd told him to hurry. The windows stared out at him, empty and lifeless, reminding Gabe of a taunting skull. He walked across the street and up the porch steps which creaked under his weight. The small noise was thunder in the silence. The front door stood open behind the screen, and Gabe could see into the front room. Spotless, empty. There was no sign anyone had ever lived here. He opened the screen door and stepped into the hall, tensed for any movement, listening for any noise. His footsteps echoed through the abandoned house. This was the third empty house in a row. He and Abigail Nelson had been finding the Unguarded, taking them to safety, protecting them from a worse fate. But something had caught up to them. It had been a race for all these years. But now he knew he was losing. Fighting an invisible enemy made him feel crazy. Losing to an invisible enemy made him feel powerless. They were just children, descendants of angels barely coming into their knowledge. Abigail had the ability to see those auras even though she was neither descendant nor guardian. She had been his ally during the darkest times of his life when all others had abandoned him. Her voice came to him through the airwaves. She spoke into a CB radio over 100 miles away, but Gabe could hear her voice with no special equipment, only the knowledge granted him when the descendant Adura chose him as her guardian. He was a guardian of descendants, and he couldn't even protect the children anymore. He'd lost another one. Maybe something had been left behind this time. A clue, an unlikely hope. He checked the house anyway. Each room was the same, devoid of furniture, floors wiped clean, even the windowsills were clear of dust. In the kitchen, the appliances had been removed, forlorn wires hanging from the wall. Gabe opened the nearest cupboard, but stopped when he heard a sound, a deep rumble that reverberated through his bones. He stilled, listening. Then he reached up for the leather handles of the two double-edged swords on his back. He pulled the swords from the sheaths and turned to face the back door. His swords glowed a pale green, edged with the green hematite stone that burned a demon's essence. The green hematite could transfer a descendant's or guardian's energy to their weapon, making it harmless to humans, but deadly to the twisted creations that tried to feed off human misery. There was a pause, no sound, no movement. Then a shadow crossed over the window. Another growl, louder, closer. Gabe tensed. His heart surged with a strangled hope. The creatures were still here. That meant he wasn't that far behind. The snarls grew louder. A sound Gabe was familiar with, a guttural growl mixed with grinding stones and howling wind. The next instant, the windows shattered as 4 creatures burst into the house. Their heads were more mouth than face, the unnaturally large jaws snapping open and shut, spittle flying from sharp teeth. Their front legs were small, most of the weight gathered in their rear haunches. Their bodies were covered with a thin layer of wet hair, slimy, sticking to their skin like the feathers of a chick recently hatched from an egg. Fenris, the demon's basic form. It was the shape they took when they were hungry, when they hadn't had a chance to feed on human essence for too long. Hunger drove them. Anger fueled them. Gabe didn't wait for an invitation. He caught the closest animal with his sword, severing the head from its body. He turned as a second animal attacked from behind, and a third dove at him from the side. Gabe stabbed his sword through the skull of one of the creatures, the green hematite crackling with electricity at the contact. He brought his other sword around in time to cut off the bottom half of another creature, shifting his shoulders so the claws barely missed the exposed skin on his neck. He turned on the fourth creature and drove both his swords into its chest. The growl turned into a pained whine as it dropped to the floor. The creatures' bodies crumbled, the poor structure of their forms unable to hold together without the life force. They weren't dead. Nothing could kill a demon essence, but they would be scattered, taking weeks or months to reform. Gabe stood in the middle of the kitchen, nothing left of the Fenris except black dust swirling across the floor.